came to mind.
If you want to turn to Psalm 105, excuse me, we're looking at the first 16 verses. Today we'll take this kind of in two parts. Psalm 105, verses 1 through 16. And this is a neat psalm. It goes back into Israel's history again, and this has happened many other times. But just to reiterate stories that we already know about and see them in kind of a different angle is very encouraging. So we'll look at the first 7 verses here. Psalm 105, starting in verse 1. He says, "Oh, give thanks unto the Lord, call upon his name, make known his deeds among the people. Sing unto him, sing songs unto him, talk ye of all his wondrous works. Glory ye in his holy name. Let the heart of them rejoice that seek the Lord. Seek the Lord in his strength. Seek his face evermore. Remember his marvelous works that he hath done, his wonders and the judgments of his mouth. O ye seed of Abraham, his servants, ye children of Jacob, his chosen. He is the Lord our God. His judgments are in all the earth." So you have nine different phrases or words used there that all come to all are centered on the fact of remember what the Lord has done. And the next few verses till the end of the chapter are talking about what the Lord has done, specifically to Israel. But I just like the variety. Give thanks to the Lord. That's part of remembering what He's did. And we talked about that on Sunday too, even just the process of music and praise. It fits into all of this, and hopefully that was understood on Sunday afternoon that music, the act of praise, is just a puzzle, just one piece of a bigger puzzle of all that we're supposed to be doing on a regular basis, not just on Sunday morning for 3 hymns before the pastor starts preaching, or we have to make sure we get some singing time in sometime during the day. No, it's a lifestyle of worship, and so thanking Him, thanking the Lord, call upon His name. To remember what He's done, we have to. You're acknowledging that you're constantly remembering that He's there. And I think that's interesting too, is to, and that's something I've been burned about, is to thank Him, even if I'm doing fine. Nothing's going wrong. There's nothing. I don't seem to have to go, oh God, please help me with this. As much as my puny mind can perceive things, everything's going okay, but I'll just thank Him anyway, and that's okay. That's part of. Well, it's not just okay. You need to do it. It's something God wants us to do. That's part of remembering Him. Make known His deeds among the people through song, through prayer request time, through praise time, whatever it might be. I think we've got to be careful at times that we're not getting involved in gossip, but I think to share with other people, this is what God did for so-and-so. In our church, we talk, and God, I think of Marlene as an example, just things that God has done in her life, or any one of us around this table, we could say things, and we've heard of things that God did, and it just keeps the pot churning. This is what God did, remembering what He did. Sing unto Him, sing songs and psalms unto Him, talk ye of all His wondrous works. There's the aspect of singing there, the aspect of music, remembering what He did, and the good songs. And I say that with looking at our hymns and the older hymns, and not saying that it's not the way today, but a lot of those are, they were meant to be a song with a message. It wasn't maybe a short phrase, or maybe 3 or 4 phrases that are repeated, which are beautiful and good as well. A lot of those hymns are heavy, and they're loaded. And if you really take the time to look through the words, they're teaching a doctrine lesson, and so which is good too. And so, but that is reminding us of His wondrous works, not just what He did on the cross for us, what He did for the Israelites, but just getting all that in there is so good. It's so good for us as New Testament Christians. Glory in His holy name. Let the heart of them rejoice that seek the Lord. So again, it's supposed to be encouraging to us. So far, and I love this about how praise is reciprocal. I can do it. It doesn't come back. He's not praising me, but as I do it, it encourages me at the same time. I can glory in God. I can get a big smile on my face, and I can react to praise, whether it's a tear in my eye, whether it's just a big smile, whatever it might be. I'm excited. Let the heart of them rejoice that seek the Lord. God wants us to be happy about this, and our heart to rejoice as we seek the Lord and remind each other what He's done. Seek the Lord in His strength. Seek His face forevermore. Remember His marvelous works that he has done, his wonders and the judgments of his mouth. The judgments of his mouth. Again, that, and I have thought of this, I think, in a too narrow way of when we talk about judgments, we think of bad things that God called to let happen. And that is one small aspect of judgments. God said, he called the 10 plagues into existence on Egypt. That was judgment. His mouth, he used Moses as the spokesperson. He said those words, and bad things happened. He's going to do that in Revelation. But we have to think too, judgments are any act of God going forth. It doesn't have to necessarily, we don't always have to think of it as bad. We want to, obviously he has done things to punish people, but through his mouth, what else has he done? He created the world. In his mouth, through his judgments, if we could call it that, his orders, basically, he created the world in six literal days. With his mouth, he's caused the 10 Commandments to be created. With his mouth, he parted the Red Sea. I mean, there's so many other examples we could look at of what he did through just the simple command of speaking. And those are the kind of things we need to remember. Those are truly marvelous works. For God not to have to, again, God's a spirit, so does he have hands that he can pick up and move something? No. But the power of his words causes things to come into existence. And so, truly marvelous. Then in 6 and 7, we see who this is really written for. The first, if we could say it in kind of, if we were studying hermeneutics, if we were studying the study of the Bible, the technical sense would this would be the primary audience. The first people that ever would have read this would have been who? Israel, the seed of Abraham, the children of Jacob. And that's why the stories that we're going to see here in the next few verses today and next week are all about Old Testament Israelites. What I like, though, is how up to now, verses 1 through 5, I can apply to myself right now. We just did it in our prayer time. We can do it on Sunday. We can do it any day we're out and about, or even with our families. We can do all those things. I can do this exact thing because, as the New Testament tells me, I am a child of Abraham. I have been adopted into that family line. And so the beautiful thing is I get to see all these things and go, wow, even though that's not directly, and I want to make that clarified, that's not my blood family, yet God lets me experience all of it. I get to be kind of that, I think I've illustrated as a third person watching a family reunion. I'm not part of the family, but I get to see the love. I get to see the togetherness. I get to see that bond. And that family then in turn loves me. And God has loved me with an everlasting love, and I get to see him love on the children of Israel. He is the Lord of our God. His judgments are in all the earth. So this applies to everyone. We can't say, this isn't for me. These words I can't apply. No, I think we can, and because it's the same God that did this for Israel. It's the same God that we just prayed to just a few moments ago. Verses 8 through 16 speaks of, in my Bible, it categorizes as God's covenants. But I'll read it here, verse 8 through 16. He has remembered his covenant forever, the word which he commanded to 1,000 generations, which covenant he made with Abraham and his oath unto Isaac, and confirmed the same unto Jacob for a law, and to Israel for an everlasting covenant, saying, Unto thee will I give the land of Canaan, and a lot of your inheritance. When they were but a few men in number, yea, very few, and strangers in it, when they went from one nation to another, from one kingdom to another people, he suffered no man to do them wrong, yea, he reproved the kings for their sakes, saying, Touch not my anointed, and do my prophets no harm. Moreover, he called for a famine upon the land. He brake the whole staff of bread. So he brings up right away in verse 8 the Abrahamic Covenant. And actually, we'll talk about that soon here in one of these afternoon services. But he remembered his covenant forevermore, the word which he commanded to 1,000 generations, the covenant he made to Abraham. That was the very first covenant that was calling Abraham out of the land of Ur. I mean, or at that time his name was Abram. His dad was an idol maker. There was nothing special about Abraham. He said, Abraham, I call you. If you want to believe me, I've got a plan for you, Abraham. Pack up. He just told him to bring his wife. He brought his nephew Lot as well. And I will show you a land, and I made this great promise to him. He made a covenant with him. He reiterated it about 3 different times in Abraham's life and did it to his sons after that. But it was, I'm going to give you a land, because he didn't own any land. you're going to have a family. He didn't have any kids. And from that family, the whole world will be blessed out of that seed line. And so that was huge because Abraham had none of those things, okay? And so he made the covenant with Abraham. And one time that is, I think it's the very first time here in Genesis 12, 1 through 3 is the Abrahamic Covenant. If you ever wanted to read that as a follow-up, Genesis 12, 1 through 3 is when that's the very first time he calls Abraham. Then he says his oath unto Isaac. And that's the same, he reiterates the same thing because Isaac was his son, and he said, Isaac's this chosen seed line. It wasn't Ishmael. It wasn't the sons that Abraham had after Sarah died. It's only through Isaac. And so in Genesis 26:4, he makes the promise to Isaac. What I thought was interesting in studying that, right after both of those, Genesis 12, 1 through 3, and Genesis 26:4, right after both those men get those promises, within few verses after that, it could have been a month or so, they choose to lie and say their wives are their sisters. Both times, Isaac does the exact same thing, and that always amazes me that they just got the promise that they will have a family, and the wife that you have will be the one that's going to have that family line through it, and they still get scared. I can't say I wouldn't do that either, but I don't think that'd be a really tough time as a relationship to say my wife is my sister. You're going down a pretty dark path there. You're pretty scared if you're going to do stuff like that. But Isaac did the same thing. He made the oath to Isaac. He confirmed the same unto Jacob. He does the exact same thing to Jacob in Genesis 28, 13 through 15. And that was right after Jacob ran away for his life. Esau was going to kill him. And he spends the first night with a rock for a pillow. And he's going, this is crazy. My brother's out to kill me. I have nothing. I don't know. My mom just caused me to trick my dad. There wasn't a whole lot going on for Jacob. In Genesis 28, 13 through 15, God says, I made the promise to your dad. I made the promise to your grandpa. I'm going to be there with you. You're going to have that seed line. You're going to have that land. And then, at the end of verse 10, and to Israel for an everlasting covenant. And this was in Deuteronomy 29, 10 through 13. As Moses is getting ready to die, it's the end of his life. And basically the book of Deuteronomy is just a long speech he gives to Israel. And in Deuteronomy 29, the entire nation steps forward and says, we will keep this promise. We will keep this covenant with Israel, or with God, I'm sorry. And it wasn't, and some people call it the Palestinian Covenant because it's not the Abrahamic, it's not anything like that. It is a conditional covenant where God said, even to the wives and the children, the men, wives, children, everyone stood up and said, we will do this. And God said, okay, you're going to enter this promise with me. If you don't, there will be consequences. If you disobey me, the Babylonians will come. I mean, bad things happen when they disobeyed God. And so that's considered a conditional covenant because certain promises were made, but those promises were broken if disobedience occurred. With Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, what we just talked about there, those are unconditional because God never says, well, you really messed up, Israel. I'm not going to give you your land anymore. I don't have a promise for you anymore. No, those are unconditional. Those are never going to change. And Paul actually says that in Romans. He says, did God forget Israel? Certainly not. And so that is a difference. We'll talk about that later. But the whole nation in Deuteronomy accepted that everlasting covenant. In verse 11, saying, unto thee will I give the land of Canaan, the lot of your inheritance. That was one portion of that promise. In 12, when they were but a few men in number, yea, very few, and strangers in it. This is when Abraham headed out. He was in the land of Ur. God said, pack up. If you believe me, if you trust me, head out. And there was only 3 of them. There had many servants. Abram wasn't necessarily an extremely wealthy man compared to his dad and others, but he had his wife, he had his nephew, himself. There was just the 3 of them, and then whatever their caravan was. And so it was very few, and they're heading out to take possession of a land that Abraham had never even seen before. I mean, that was pretty radical. Abraham would have had to really step out in faith and say, I believe this God I've never even heard of. I believe this God that I don't even know his name. And yet they were stepping out in faith with just a few people, 3 people in their caravan, to do this, to go in as strangers into land that God had just said, this is going to be yours someday. Big promise. But they went from one nation to another, it says in verse 13, from one kingdom to another, went through a lot of different nations to get to the land of Canaan. In verse 14, he suffered no man to do them wrong, yea, he reproved the kings for their sakes. In Genesis 12:6, it speaks about them going through the nation, through different lands. That was Abraham and his family. In Genesis 12:7 is the reference when Abram said, "Hey Sarah, let's again, like I said, let's lie and say you're my sister." And Pharaoh actually takes Sarah into his harem, and God sends a terrible illness, plague, basically, to Pharaoh and his family. And Pharaoh knew it was because of Abram. He's sick and calls Abraham and says, "Why'd you do this to me? I mean, you should have told me she's your wife. Get out of here. Here's some." And he gave him a lot of things. He didn't punish him. He gave him a lot of money and said, "Get out, get out." Our whole household here, his whole household was being punished because he had taken Sarah into his harem. And then Isaac gets reprimanded by one of the kings of the Philistines when he says, "My wife Rebekah is my sister," and the king actually gets. I think God actually talks to him directly and says, "You touch her and you're a dead man." And he's like, "Whoa, Isaac, why didn't you tell me that?" And so God was protecting that seed line. God was protecting that family throughout all that. He was even reprimanding kings to say, turn around and really kind of give Abraham and Isaac a hard time. They're not doing what they're supposed to. So he was reprimanding kings. Suffer no man to do them wrong. Verse 15, saying, "Touch not my anointed." That's what God told the king of the Philistines, one of the kings of the Philistines, "Don't touch my anointed." Rebekah, Isaac, that couple, that's mine. Don't touch them. And suffer and do my prophets no harm. And then verse 16, we get to the end of this section, but this is speaking of the famine that came, and this is the time of Joseph. The next verse right over that we'll see next week is speaking of Joseph and his time, but they're called a famine upon the land and break the whole staff of bread. And so we've jumped through the three characters of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Now we're at the youngest, the second to the youngest of Jacob's family, of his son Joseph, who's been led off to captivity. And now God, through his providence, just his sovereignty, has put Joseph in the best place possible to lead that nation, to store their food, be prudent with it. And now the famine has come, and God wants to bring that family back together again. And so we'll see how that happens next time. But that's where we're at with verse 16. We're now at the time of Joseph, second in command of Egypt. The famine has come. They had the 7 years of plenty. Now the 7 years of really, really hard times. And God lets, through Joseph's presence there, Egypt had saved all that food, had a lot of grain. And Jacob and his 12 sons or 11 sons are back home going, we're going to see our kids die here if we don't head off to Egypt. And so God has all this planned, worked out perfectly. But a neat summary up to there. Anything else you want to add on that, or additional questions or anything on those first 16 verses?
The thought hit me today, we have to live as if Jesus is coming today, but realize it could still be 100 years.
Yeah. Yeah, and the neat thing is it does require a mental change for us, but it doesn't require for us to say, well, I better stockpile food or get a bunch of ammo or get the bunker ready to go because we're going to be here for. No, it's just be faithful in serving Him, and when He calls us, that's okay. Yeah, it's exciting. That's a good point.
And you can sing yourself to sleep.
There's some beautiful things we can do. Yeah. Good.